Orphaned teen donates lunch money to homeless man, later discovers man is long-lost uncle. The words echoed in Jamie Foster's mind as he stared at the small newspaper clipping pinned to the community bulletin board. Someone had written about him, about them, without permission. The 16-year-old's fingers trembled as he tore the article down, crumpling it into his pocket before anyone else at Westridge High could see it. Some things were too precious, too raw to become public spectacle. 3 months earlier, Jamie wouldn't have imagined his life could change through something as simple as spare lunch money. But that was before the man with the familiar eyes appeared on the corner of Maple and Fifth. Winter had descended early on the small town of Riverview, bringing with it the kind of cold that seeped through layers and settled in bones. Jamie pulled his threadbare jacket tighter around his lanky frame as he walked to school. The jacket, like most things he owned, was a hand-me-down, part of the rotating wardrobe that cycled through the foster system where he'd spent the last 8 years of his life. Since his parents' death in the car accident when he was 8, Jamie had drifted through 4 foster homes. The Wilsons, his current placement, were decent enough. They provided the basics, didn't ask too many questions, and gave him the space that a teenage boy craved. But they weren't family. Nobody had been family since the accident. The man hadn't been there the day before. Jamie noticed him immediately, a hunched figure on the corner, a cardboard sign clutched in reddened hands. Veteran. Hungry. Anything helps. The man's beard was salt and pepper, his face weathered like leather left too long in the sun. But it was his eyes that made Jamie pause. Deep-set hazel eyes that seemed to hold more sorrow than a single life should bear. Jamie's hand instinctively went to his pocket, feeling the crisp $5 bill Mrs. Wilson had given him for lunch. His stomach growled in protest. He'd skipped breakfast, as usual, preferring the extra 20 minutes of sleep to the awkward small talk around the Wilsons' kitchen table. Just keep walking, he muttered to himself. Everyone else did. Business people strode past with averted gazes. Mothers pulled their children closer. Teenagers snickered or pretended not to notice. The invisibility of homelessness was a social contract everyone seemed to understand. But Jamie couldn't look away from those eyes. There was something about them, something eerily, uncomfortably familiar that tugged at the corners of his memory. Before he could think better of it, Jamie changed course. His sneakers, worn at the edges and speckled with mud, carried him to the corner where the man sat. "Here," Jamie said, thrusting the $5 bill forward. The man looked up, surprise flickering across his weathered face. "You sure, kid? That's your lunch money, isn't it?" Jamie shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. "I'm not hungry anyway." It was a lie. He was always hungry these days, growing inches every month, as Mrs. Wilson liked to remind him when she bought groceries. But something about the man's dignified posture, despite his circumstances, about the gentle timbre of his voice, made the hunger seem insignificant. The man hesitated, then reached for the bill with trembling fingers. "Thank you," he said quietly. "God bless you." Their hands brushed briefly during the exchange, a fleeting moment of human contact that sent an inexplicable shiver up Jamie's spine. As he turned to leave, the man spoke again. "What's your name, son?" Jamie paused, one foot already stepping back toward his regular route. Something told him to lie, to protect himself with anonymity. But those eyes, those hauntingly familiar eyes, seemed to peer straight through him. "Jamie," he answered. "Jamie Foster." The bill slipped from the man's fingers. It fluttered to the ground between them like a wounded bird. The color drained from the man's face, leaving it ashen beneath the weathered tan. "Foster," the man repeated, his voice barely audible above the morning traffic. "Did you say Foster?" Jamie nodded, uneasy now. He glanced at his watch. He'd be late if he didn't hurry. "I gotta go." Before the man could respond, Jamie was jogging away, his backpack bouncing uncomfortably against his shoulder blades. All through first period English, he couldn't shake the image of the man's face when he'd heard the name Foster, like he'd seen a ghost materialize in broad daylight. The next morning, Jamie took a different route to school. He told himself it was because of the time. He'd hit snooze twice and was running late. But the truth hung heavy in his chest. Something about the homeless man had unsettled him, had stirred up the carefully buried grief he'd locked away after his parents died. By Thursday, curiosity overcame avoidance. Jamie left the house 10 minutes early, a half-eaten piece of toast in one hand and $2 borrowed from his emergency stash in his pocket. He wasn't sure why he was going back, only that the man's reaction to his name had planted a seed of questions he couldn't ignore. The corner was empty. The space where the man had sat, the small cardboard square flattened against the concrete, the blue tarp folded neatly against the building, was vacant, as though he'd never existed at all. Jamie stood there longer than he should have, watching the spot as if the man might materialize from thin air. He was late to school that day, earning a disapproving look from his first period teacher. But he couldn't focus on Shakespeare or algebraic equations. His mind kept returning to those hazel eyes and the way they'd widened in shock at his name. The next week passed in a blur of routine: school, homework, the polite distance of the Wilson household. Jamie checked the corner each morning, but the man didn't return. He told himself it was better this way, safer. The unexpected disappointment that tightened his chest was illogical, unwelcome. It was Tuesday afternoon when Jamie saw him again. Not on the corner, but outside the public library where Jamie sometimes went to study. The man sat on a bench, reading a tattered paperback, his possessions in a small backpack at his feet. He looked cleaner than before, his beard trimmed, though his clothes were still worn and mismatched. Jamie hesitated on the steps, backpack slung over one shoulder, the weight of decisions pressing against his chest. He could walk past, pretend not to see him. He could go inside as planned and lose himself in history textbooks and calculus problems. Instead, his feet carried him to the bench. "Mind if I sit?" The man looked up, recognition flashing across his face. "Jamie," he said, and there was something in the way he said the name, a softness, almost reverent, that made Jamie's heart stutter. "You know," Jamie said, sitting down and keeping a careful distance between them, "most people would find it creepy that a homeless guy remembers their name after one meeting." A small smile crossed the man's face. "Fair enough, but you remembered me too." Jamie shrugged, staring at his hands. "You kind of freaked out when I told you my last name." Silence stretched between them, filled with the ambient noise of passing cars and distant conversations. The man closed his book, keeping one finger between the pages to mark his place. "My name is Robert," he finally said. "Robert Keene." He paused, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. "I. I knew your parents." The world tilted sharply beneath Jamie, a seismic shift that left him dizzy. What? Robert, no longer just the homeless man, but a person with a name and a sudden, terrifying connection to Jamie's past, nodded slowly. "David and Sarah Foster. Your father he was my sister's husband." The words hung in the space between them, too enormous to immediately process. Jamie stared, his mind frantically trying to piece together what this meant. "You're saying, you're my uncle?" The words felt foreign on his tongue, impossible. Robert's eyes, those hauntingly familiar eyes that Jamie now realized reminded him of photos of his mother, grew damp. "Yes," he whispered. "Sarah was my little sister." Jamie's body reacted before his mind could catch up. He was on his feet, backpack clutched to his chest like a shield. "That's impossible. My social worker said there was no family. No one who could take me in after—" The words caught in his throat. Even after 8 years, he couldn't say it aloud. "After they died." Robert's face crumpled. "Jamie, please. Let me explain." But Jamie was already backing away, shaking his head. "I have to go." He turned and ran, heart hammering against his ribs, the ground unsteady beneath his feet. Behind him, he thought he heard Robert call his name. But he didn't look back. That night, Jamie couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars stuck to his ceiling. Leftovers from the Wilson son who'd gone to college 2 years ago. If what Robert said was true, if he really was Jamie's uncle, where had he been for the past 8 years? Why had Jamie been shuttled between foster homes if he had family out there? And beneath these questions lay a darker one. Why was his supposed uncle homeless, holding a cardboard sign on a street corner? Morning came with heavy eyes and an ache behind his temples. Mrs. Wilson noticed at breakfast, her forehead creasing with concern. "You feeling all right, Jamie? You look like you barely slept." Jamie nodded, pushing cereal around his bowl. "Just studying late. Tests coming up." She seemed to accept this, turning back to her newspaper. Jamie appreciated that about the Wilsons. They cared enough to notice when something was wrong, but they also respected his space. After years in the system, he'd learned that was rare. He didn't check the library after school that day, or the next. Part of him hoped Robert would disappear again, taking with him the uncomfortable questions about Jamie's past and the years of absence. But a smaller, quieter part, the part that still kept his parents' photo under his pillow, desperately wanted answers. On Friday afternoon, Jamie found himself walking to the public library, hands shoved deep in his pockets against the November chill. He told himself he was going to study for his history test, but he knew the real reason his steps quickened as the building came into view. Robert was there, sitting on the same bench as if he'd been waiting all week. When he spotted Jamie, his face lit up with such naked hope that Jamie had to look away. "You came back," Robert said as Jamie approached, his voice carefully neutral despite the emotion evident in his eyes. Jamie sat, leaving less space between them this time. "I want proof," he said without preamble, "that you're who you say you are, that you knew my parents." Robert nodded, reaching slowly into his backpack. He pulled out a plastic shopping bag, protecting its contents from the elements. From within it, he extracted a photograph, its edges worn but the image still clear. He handed it to Jamie with trembling fingers. It was a family picnic scene, his father's arm around his mother's shoulders, both of them laughing. A much younger Jamie, maybe 4 or 5, sat on a blanket at their feet, concentrating intensely on building a sandcastle. And there next to his father was Robert, younger, clean-shaven, healthy-looking, but unmistakably the same man. Jamie's fingers tightened on the photo. His throat constricted painfully as he stared at his parents' faces. His father's kind eyes, his mother's radiant smile. He'd forgotten how beautiful she was when she laughed. "This doesn't explain where you've been," Jamie said, his voice hoarse. "Why didn't you come for me?" "After the accident?" Pain flashed across Robert's face. "I was overseas when it happened. Military deployment. By the time I got the news and made it back, you'd already been placed in the system." He paused, swallowing hard. "I tried to find you, Jamie. I filed for custody, but..." "But what?" Jamie demanded, anger suddenly flaring hot and bright. Robert looked down at his hands. "I wasn't in good shape. The war. It did things to me. PTSD, they called it. I was drinking too much. Couldn't hold down a job. The court deemed me unfit." His voice broke on the last word. "They were right. I couldn't take care of myself, let alone a child." The raw honesty in Robert's voice dampened Jamie's anger, leaving confusion and hurt in its wake. "So you just gave up? For 8 years?" "No," Robert said firmly, meeting Jamie's gaze. "I got help. Went to rehab, got treatment for the PTSD. It took years and there were setbacks. I'd get back on my feet, find you, learn you'd been moved to another home, then spiral again." He gestured to his current state. "Last year I was doing well. Had an apartment, a job at a warehouse. Then the company downsized, I lost my place, and..." He shrugged, the gesture conveying months of hardship in a single movement. "I came to Riverview because I finally tracked you here. I've been sleeping at the shelter when there's room, trying to get enough money together to find a place, get stable again before approaching you." A sad smile crossed his face. "I didn't expect you to find me first, or to give me your lunch money." Jamie stared at the photograph in his hands, at the family that existed only in memories and faded images now. "I have questions," he said quietly. "About them. About before." Relief washed over Robert's face. "Ask me anything." For the next hour, they sat on that bench as the November sun dipped lower in the sky. Robert told Jamie stories about his mother as a child, how she'd once released all the frogs from their elementary school science class because she couldn't bear to see them dissected. He described Jamie's father's terrible jokes and incredible talent for fixing anything mechanical. He filled in the blank spaces of Jamie's memory with details both mundane and precious. When Jamie finally noticed the time, he stood reluctantly. "I should get back. Mrs. Wilson worries if I'm late for dinner." Robert nodded, carefully returning the photograph to its protective covering. Would it be all right if we talked again?" The vulnerability in the question made Robert seem smaller somehow, despite his height. Jamie hesitated, then nodded. "I'm usually here after school, for studying." The smile that spread across Robert's face was like sunrise after a long night. "I'll be here." And he was, the next day and the day after that. Their bench became a regular meeting place. Jamie brought a thermos of hot coffee sometimes, or sandwiches made from the Wilsons' always full refrigerator. Robert brought stories, filling the vast emptiness of Jamie's family history with colorful details and warm memories. 2 weeks into their meetings, Jamie arrived to find Robert looking more disheveled than usual, dark circles beneath his eyes. "What happened?" Jamie asked, sitting beside him. Robert tried to smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Shelter's full this week. Been sleeping rough." Something twisted in Jamie's chest. A protective instinct he hadn't felt for anyone in years. "It's supposed to freeze tonight?" Robert shrugged. "I've got my sleeping bag. Found a spot under the bridge that blocks the wind pretty well." Jamie thought of his warm bed at the Wilsons, the extra blankets in the hall closet. He thought of this man, his uncle, his blood, shivering beneath a bridge while winter tightened its grip on the town. "I have an idea," Jamie said slowly, "but you have to promise to hear me out." That evening, Jamie approached Mr. Wilson in his workshop behind the house. The older man was tinkering with a broken lawnmower, his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. Mr. Wilson? Can I talk to you about something? Wilson looked up, surprised. In the 18 months Jamie had lived with them, he'd rarely initiated conversation. Of course, son. What's on your mind? Jamie took a deep breath. I found my uncle. The story spilled out of him. Meeting Robert, learning of their connection, the circumstances that had kept them apart. Mr. Wilson listened without interrupting, his weathered face thoughtful. And now he's sleeping under a bridge because the shelter's full. Jamie finished. I was wondering if we could help him somehow. Mr. Wilson removed his glasses, polishing them on his shirt while he considered. This is a lot to take in, Jamie. Have you told Mrs. Wilson yet? Jamie shook his head. I wanted to talk to you first. A small smile touched the corner of Mr. Wilson's mouth. Smart. She's always had a soft spot for you. Might get emotional about this. He sighed, replacing his glasses. The garage apartment isn't much, but it's got heat and a bathroom. Was going to rent it out next month anyway. Hope flared in Jamie's chest. Really? You'd let him stay there? Hold on now, Mr. Wilson cautioned. I'd need to meet this uncle of yours first. Make sure everything checks out. And there'd have to be conditions. No drinking, no drugs, and he'd need to be looking for work. He is, Jamie said quickly. Looking for work, I mean. And he's been sober for years. Mr. Wilson nodded slowly. Bring him by tomorrow after school. We'll talk. The next day was one of the longest of Jamie's life. He could barely focus in class, his mind racing with possibilities and fears. What if the Wilsons didn't like Robert? What if they thought he was lying? What if this one chance at reconnecting with his family slipped through his fingers? Robert was waiting on their bench when Jamie arrived, hands tucked into the sleeves of his coat for warmth. His face lit up at the sight of Jamie, then quickly turned concern. What's wrong? You look like you're about to jump out of your skin. Jamie sat, his leg bouncing nervously. I talked to my foster father about you, about your situation. Alarm flashed across Robert's face. Jamie, he wants to meet you. Jamie interrupted. They have a garage apartment. It's small, but it's warm and private, and it could be yours, at least until you get back on your feet. Robert stared at him, stunned into silence. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. Jamie, I can't accept that. Your foster family doesn't know me. They have no reason to trust me. That's why Mr. Wilson wants to meet you. Jamie insisted. Please, just come talk to him. The worst that happens is he says no and nothing changes. But they both knew that wasn't true. Something had already changed between them. A fragile bridge of trust that could collapse under the weight of rejection. After a long moment, Robert nodded. All right. For you, I'll try. The walk to the Wilson house was quiet, each lost in their own thoughts. Jamie led Robert through the side gate to the backyard, where Mr. Wilson was waiting by the garage, his expression neutral but evaluating. Mr. Wilson, this is my uncle, Robert Keene, Jamie said, his voice steadier than he felt. Robert, this is Michael Wilson, my foster father. The two men sized each other up, then shook hands. Thank you for agreeing to meet me. Robert said, I understand your concerns, and I want you to know I don't expect anything. Jamie's well-being comes first. Something in Mr. Wilson's posture relaxed slightly. Why don't we all sit down and talk? Margaret's made some coffee. Inside the main house, Mrs. Wilson greeted them with cautious warmth, her eyes darting between Jamie and Robert with unconcealed curiosity. They gathered around the kitchen table, steam rising from ceramic mugs as Robert told his story again. The military service, the struggles afterward, the years trying to find stability in his nephew. I have documentation, Robert said, reaching into his backpack. My discharge papers, ID, the custody petition I filed all those years ago. He laid them on the table like offerings. I understand if you need time to verify everything. Mrs. Wilson's eyes were damp as she looked at the papers. You've been looking for him all this time. Robert nodded, his gaze shifting to Jamie. He's all the family I have left. The Wilsons exchanged a long look. One of those silent conversations married couples perfect over decades together. Finally, Mr. Wilson turned to Robert. The apartment needs some cleaning, but it's yours if you want it, in exchange for help around the property and a serious job search. No rent for the first month. After that, we can discuss what's fair based on your situation. Robert's hands trembled around his coffee mug. I don't know what to say. Say yes, Jamie urged, unable to contain himself any longer. Please. A smile broke across Robert's face, the first full, unguarded smile Jamie had seen from him. Yes, thank you. I promise you won't regret this. Later, after Robert had been shown the apartment and given a set of clean sheets and towels, Jamie helped him settle in. The space was small but tidy, a main room with a kitchenette, a separate bedroom, and a bathroom. After weeks on the streets and in crowded shelters, it seemed like a palace to Robert. I can't believe this is happening, Robert said, sitting on the edge of the bed. This morning I was figuring out where to hide my backpack while I looked for day labor. And now you're home, Jamie finished for him. The word felt right in a way he hadn't expected. Home wasn't just a place, it was people, connections, the threads of shared history. Robert looked up, his eyes shining. I want you to know something, Jamie. I never stopped looking for you. Even at my lowest, I carried your picture with me. He reached into his wallet and extracted a worn school photo. Jamie at 8, missing his front teeth, his hair neatly combed for picture day. Your mother sent it to me overseas. It was the last thing I got from her. Jamie stared at the photo, at this tangible proof that he had been loved and remembered even when he'd felt most abandoned. Something broke loose inside him, a dam holding back years of loneliness and grief. Before he could stop himself, he was crying, deep racking sobs that seemed to come from the very core of him. Robert moved instinctively, wrapping his arms around Jamie's shaking shoulders. It's okay, he murmured, his own voice unsteady. Let it out. I've got you now. They stayed like that, uncle and nephew, the last remaining pieces of a family shattered by tragedy, beginning the slow, painstaking process of rebuilding something new from the fragments. The weeks that followed were a period of adjustment for everyone. Robert, with Mr. Wilson's help, found work at a local hardware store. The manager, a veteran himself, was willing to give Robert a chance, despite the gap in his employment history. Jamie split his time between school, home, and the apartment above the garage, where he and Robert shared meals and continued to fill in the blank spaces in each other's lives. It wasn't always smooth. Robert had nightmares sometimes, violent ones that left him gasping and disoriented. Jamie learned to recognize the haunted look that followed, to sit quietly with his uncle until the present reality reasserted itself over battlefield memories. And Jamie had his own walls. Years in the foster system had taught him to keep people at arm's length, to protect himself from the pain of inevitable separation. But slowly, cautiously, they built trust. Jamie brought his homework to Robert's apartment, working at the small table while Robert cooked simple meals or read. They developed routines. Sunday morning walks, Friday movie nights on Robert's secondhand laptop, impromptu history lessons when Jamie's textbooks covered wars Robert had studied extensively. As Christmas approached, bringing with it school vacation and a blanket of snow over Riverview, Jamie found himself spending more and more time in the garage apartment. The Wilsons noticed but said nothing, seeming to understand Jamie's need to absorb as much time with his uncle as possible, as if making up for the lost years. It was during one of these quiet evenings, as they sat playing chess on a board Mr. Wilson had loaned them, that Robert cleared his throat nervously. I've been saving, he said, moving his knight, from the hardware store. Almost enough for a security deposit on an apartment in town. Jamie froze, his hand hovering over a pawn. You're leaving. Not leaving Riverview, Robert clarified quickly. Just getting my own place. Standing on my own feet again. He hesitated. I was hoping, that is, I've been talking to my therapist about it, and to a social worker. About what? Jamie's heart pounded painfully against his ribs. Robert met his gaze steadily. About applying for guardianship. If you wanted that, if the Wilsons agreed, the chess piece slipped from Jamie's fingers, clattering onto the board and knocking over several others. You want me to live with you? Only if you want to, Robert said. The Wilsons have been good to you, and I wouldn't want to disrupt your life if you're happy here. But yes, I'd like the chance to be a real family again. Jamie stared at the scattered chess pieces, his mind racing. The Wilsons had been kind, had provided stability when he desperately needed it. But they had always been temporary. Foster parents, not forever family. Robert was blood, was connection to his parents, was the possibility of something permanent. I'd have to think about it, Jamie said finally. Talk to the Wilsons. Robert nodded, relief evident in his face. Of course, there's time. It would be months before anything could happen, even if everyone agreed. I just wanted you to know that's my goal. To be worthy of raising my sister's son. That night, Jamie lay awake in his bed, staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars that no longer seemed childish, but comforting in their steady, artificial light. He thought about the journey that had begun with $5 of lunch money and a homeless man with familiar eyes. How could he have known that small act of kindness would lead here, to the possibility of family, of belonging, after so many years of carefully managed expectations? The next morning he found Mrs. Wilson in the kitchen preparing breakfast as she did every day. Jamie sat at the counter, watching her efficient movements as she cracked eggs into a bowl. "Mrs. Wilson, can I talk to you about something?" She looked up, her expression soft. "Of course, Jamie. What's on your mind?" Jamie took a deep breath. "Robert asked if he said he wants to apply for guardianship. Eventually, when he's more stable." Mrs. Wilson's hands stilled, but her face remained calm. "And how do you feel about that?" "I don't know," Jamie admitted. "I'm grateful for everything you and Mr. Wilson have done for me. You've been better than most foster parents I've had. But Robert is family." Mrs. Wilson finished for him. She set down the whisk and came around the counter to sit beside him. "Jamie, when we became foster parents, we knew the goal was always reunification when possible. We've tried to give you stability and care, but we've never pretended to replace your real family." Jamie nodded, throat tight with unexpected emotion. "If Robert continues on this positive path, if he can provide a safe home and the authorities approve it, Mr. Wilson and I would support your transition to his care." She smiled, though her eyes were damp. "We'd miss you terribly, of course. But we'd still be in your life if you wanted." "I would," Jamie said quickly. "Want that, I mean?" Mrs. Wilson squeezed his hand. "Then that's what we'll plan for. One day at a time." Over the next few months, Robert continued to rebuild his life with steady determination. He was promoted at the hardware store, took on additional shifts, and saved every extra dollar. He attended therapy religiously, joined a veteran support group, and even started volunteering at the homeless shelter where he'd once sought refuge. By spring, he had enough for a modest one-bedroom apartment closer to town. The Wilsons helped him move Mr. Wilson, arriving with his pickup truck and tools to assemble the second-hand furniture Robert had purchased. Mrs. Wilson brought curtains and kitchen essentials, practical gifts to make the space feel like home. As summer approached, bringing with it the anniversary of their first meeting, Robert invited Jamie to the apartment for a special dinner. When Jamie arrived, he found the small dining table set carefully, a cake in the center with a single candle. "What's the occasion?" Jamie asked, setting down his backpack. Robert smiled, suddenly looking nervous. "A few things, actually." He gestured for Jamie to sit, then took a folder from the counter. "First, I wanted to celebrate 1 year of sobriety. Made it official last week." "That's amazing," Jamie said, genuinely proud. He'd learned enough about addiction and recovery over the past months to understand what a significant milestone this was. "And second," Robert continued, opening the folder, "I received these today." He slid a set of documents across the table. Jamie picked them up, scanning the official letterhead. His heart skipped when he saw the words, "Petition for Guardianship," and both their names. "My caseworker helped me file," Robert explained. "It's just the beginning of the process. There will be home inspections, interviews, background checks. It could take months, but it started." Jamie stared at the papers, at the possibility they represented. "Does this mean?" "It means if everything goes well, and if it's still what you want, you could come live with me by Christmas." Robert's voice wavered slightly. "We could be a family again, Jamie. A real one." The word family hung in the air between them, weighted with years of absence, with shared grief, with cautious hope. Jamie looked around the small apartment, at the photos Robert had framed, including several recent ones of Jamie, at the chessboard set up permanently by the window, at the second-hand desk Robert had bought, just in case Jamie needed a place to study. He thought of his parents, of his mother's laugh preserved in Robert's stories, of his father's kindness evident in the uncle who had never stopped searching for him. And he thought of that winter day when he'd given his lunch money to a stranger, never imagining how that simple act would change both their lives. "I'd like that," Jamie said, his voice thick with emotion. "To be a family again." Robert's smile was like sunrise breaking through clouds. He reached across the table, covering Jamie's hand with his own. "Then that's what we'll be." Outside, spring had fully given way to summer. The same sun that had witnessed their first meeting now painted the apartment in golden afternoon light, warming the space that would soon be home to both of them. There would be challenges ahead. The guardianship process was never simple, and both still carried wounds that needed time to fully heal. But sitting there with the documentation of their future spread between them and the cake waiting to be cut, Jamie felt something he hadn't experienced in 8 long years. The absolute certainty that he belonged somewhere, with someone who would never stop fighting to keep him close. "You know," Robert said, lighting the candle with a trembling hand, "I've been thinking a lot about that day we met. If you hadn't stopped, if you hadn't given me that $5, we would have found each other eventually." Jamie finished with conviction. "You never gave up looking." "No," Robert agreed softly, "and I never will." As the candle flickered between them, casting dancing shadows across the table, uncle and nephew smiled at each other across the narrowing distance of years lost and found. Their story, begun in grief, cemented through a random act of kindness, and now building toward a shared future, was only just beginning its next chapter. This time they would write it together.